James Thomas, Morning Blend. I'm here today with award-winning producer Marc Smerling, and we're talking about A Wilderness of Error, and it's based on a best-selling book. How are you, Marc?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Tell me about this very interesting documentary on something that happened nearly 50 years ago.
Well, it's probably the most popularized true crime story in American history. It's about this Green Beret doctor who was stationed at Fort Bragg, and he claimed that a band of drugged out hippies came into his house in the middle of the night and murdered his family. He went to the hospital with one wound, and very quickly the army decided he was actually the person who murdered his family, and they had an investigative hearing. And during that hearing, another woman was sort of revealed, and she said that actually she was one of the hippies and she'd been in the house. So Jeffrey MacDonald, who was the Green Beret, went free. 9 years later, he was tried in a civilian court, and he was found guilty of all three murders, and he's in prison today.
Wow, I didn't know our justice system could do that. So that he was actually convicted, and then lady came
So
forward.
actually set free by the army and then convicted by a civilian court. So yeah, you can be tried again. It wasn't a trial in the army; it was an evidentiary hearing.
So what can we look forward to in this A Wilderness of Error? What can we expect to see out of this whole story unfolding?
Well, I think what we've done is we've slowed the story down. You know, the story's been told so many times. There was a hugely successful TV movie off of Joe McGinnis's hugely successful book about it called Fatal Vision. There were also many other books and many other documentaries and many other scripted narrative movies about it. And I just thought this thing had been sort of litigated in the public for a very long time. Maybe we could slow it down. We could take a closer look at everything, and we could also take a look at how the storytelling had sort of affected reality. And if we did that, maybe we could come to some new conclusions about the crime.
So, Marc, it's very interesting. What is so fascinating about this story that's so much a book and a couple of movies and a documentary have been made about it? What makes it so fascinating?
Well, you have to time travel back to 1970, I think, to understand that. I mean, Jeffrey MacDonald is a Green Beret doctor. He's a Princeton grad. He's the All-American boy. He was captain of his high school football team, top of his class, and he's handsome, and he's just the perfect American guy. And I think it was very difficult for people back then to understand that he may have committed these crimes. And then, of course, it was publicized. You know, it was in the midst of the Vietnam War. This Jeffrey was on Fort Bragg, which was one of the big stations for sending people over to Asia, and it just created this firestorm of newspaper reports and television reports. I mean, Walter Cronkite was talking about it every night on the CBS News. So that turned into a much more popular perspective from a media standpoint. People started writing books about it. People started writing movies about it. Documentaries were made about it. So it sort of kept going and never stopped.
And that sounds about right, Marc. A Wilderness of Error is on FX. It's a documentary series, and it's based on, yeah, 50 years ago, Jeffrey MacDonald. And I hate to say this, I do remember that.
Yeah, so do I. It's amazing. I remember the TV movie with Carl Malden and Yves Saint Marie, and what a huge event was. I mean, you couldn't get that audience today, right? I think 60 million people watched the first episode of that the night it aired.
Well, you may get the same amount of people to watch on the FX channel for Wilderness of Error. Marc, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this very interesting documentary on a very interesting situation that happened 50 years ago.
Thank you for having me.